So, truthfully, I originally wanted to make this video about natural navigation, and I had done my book review on a book called The Natural Navigator, The Rediscovered Art of Letting Nature Be Your Guide, and the whole book was about recognizing the different ways that you can naturally navigate based on your environment. So it talked about the sea, the sun, the moon, the stars, creatures, your senses, and I thought that was really interesting. And what I specifically wanted to focus on was the shadow stick method of figuring out your direction and navigating and looking at the stars. So I did a lot of research on what constellations are where and how you can find, the Big Dipper and find the North Star and know that you're going north, and that there is another constellation that you can look for that shows you where south is. And so I had entirely planned on doing that, and as well as the shadow stick method, which is where you put a stick up in the ground and you look at where the shadow falls and you mark where that shadow falls, and then you go back an hour later and you mark where the shadow is again, and you can kind of track that path and see where the sun was coming from and where it's going. But with my work hours and with the fact that it has been raining every single day this week, we've had a lot of storms, the sky is completely cloudy, and I have not been able to see the stars, and I was not able to mark the ground for the shadow stick method without it washing away. So I decided to focus on some things that you can do to help yourself if you are having a medical emergency while you are in a survival situation. And the first thing that I decided to talk about was what to do if you have a really large gash and you're bleeding. So for the purposes of my demonstration, I'm going to say that I have a big gash on my arm. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is to apply pressure. So I have these individually wrapped gauze packs, and I think that I would have had something like this packed if I were going out into the wilderness or the outdoors and I needed to have some basic first aid things. I would include these. So the first thing that you're going to do is if you need to stop the bleeding. So I would hold the gauze onto the wound to stop the bleeding, because by holding pressure on it, it allows the blood to clot and form that thin layer over it to help stop the bleeding from happening. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. The second thing is that you want to raise the wound above your heart. So I'm going to keep direct pressure. I'm going to raise my arm up because raising it above your heart helps the blood flow back down and helps to reduce the bleeding. So I would keep it above my heart. And if the gauze soaked through and it was still bleeding profusely, something to always remember is not to take off the original piece of gauze that you had on there, because taking it off may reopen the wound and get rid of whatever clot that you may have. So if you do need to put more gauze because it's soaked through, it is important to remember to just put more on top of what is already there. And fastening it in place with like medical tape or tying like a piece of a shirt around it is always a good way to keep that pressure on. And if in the event that it does not stop bleeding and it is still going, you can fashion a tourniquet out of some of the things around you. They do sell tourniquets that you can buy, which I don't have one, that comes as a strap, and it makes it easy to kind of like ratchet it and twist it to put that pressure. But if you're in an emergency and you don't have that, you can always cut off a shirt sleeve. You can use a backpack strap, or you can even use a belt, which is what I am going to show. So if you have a belt and you need to make a tourniquet, obviously it might not be as easy as I'm doing it right now, because you might have, an open wound on an arm or a leg or something. But if you're going to take your belt first, and you're going to make sure that the clasp is free, that this is not in your way, and you're going to fold a loop on the other end of the belt. So you should have an open space in the middle with your loop and your clasp. So then you're going to take the loop and you're going to put it inside the top of your loop to where it'll look like this. You should have a big loop and you'll have a smaller loop. The next thing to do is to widen the inner loop and make them both bigger. You'll have one free end and you should have a double loop on your tourniquet. the next thing you're going to do, which obviously again might be hard if you have an injury on your arm, but this is helpful even if you are helping somebody else, then you're going to put it on wherever you need, and then you are going to tighten it. So the more that you tighten it, you'll get more of that tighter grip, and you can keep pulling it until it gets as tight as you need it to be. If you are using something such as a shirt sleeve or a backpack strap, you also are going to want to find a stick or something that you can put in the middle, because you're going to want to tie it around the stick and you'll twist it, because that's how you'll tighten that shirt strap, because there's only so much you can do to pull it, and especially if it's something that you're doing on yourself, you need to be able to twist it to get that tightened grip. So once you have it here, you're always going to put the tourniquet between your heart and the wound so that it cuts off the blood flow to the wound and it stops bleeding, and then that controls the bleeding. It's also still important to remember to keep it above your heart. So if this wound is on my arm, I'm going to keep it up here, and that can help you to stop bleeding. And in extreme cases, if the bleeding doesn't stop, you could do cauterization, which is really not recommended to do by yourself at all, because it is a very dangerous thing and you can end up giving yourself pretty severe burns. But in the event that you were in an emergency situation, you needed to cauterize a wound, you can take the flat tip of a blade on a knife and you can heat it up in a fire or with a lighter just to the point right before it glows red, and then you take the tip of that knife and you would lightly tap it on the wound for a few seconds at a time until the bleeding stops. So once the bleeding stops, you're going to want to make sure that you wash it and clean it as best you can and wrap it up so that it does not get an infection. Of course, when you are trying to clean a wound, it is not always easy, especially if you're in a situation where you were not as prepared for an injury as you thought you might be. Something that I always have are these little packets of ointment, and it is bacitracin, which is an infection-fighting ointment. And they're just these little packs that have it in there, and they're easy to carry around. They're super small. But if you did not have something like this, coconut oil and tea tree oil can be used as a natural ointment, but it's also probably not very likely that you would just have coconut oil and tea tree oil with you. Something that I also think is important to have on you is maybe a smaller bottle than this, but a small bottle of witch hazel, because witch hazel is a natural anti-inflammatory and an astringent, and it helps with overproduction of oil, irritated skin, inflammation, redness, which means that it can be really helpful to reduce swelling and inflammation with a sunburn. So if I were going to be outside a lot, if I was even just going on a hike and I knew that I needed something to make sure I didn't get sunburnt, I would probably bring some witch hazel with me. Something that you can also use to if you get a small wound, if you get a small cut, or you get just something small that is open enough and it's bleeding and you need to quickly close it, super glue is something that you can always have with you. I personally usually have some form of nails on, so I always have a small bottle of nail glue, and I always keep one in my purse. I actually have had to super glue a cut together before, and it's not necessarily the best thing that you can do, but even if you go to the hospital, sometimes they will super glue a cut if it is something that can't really be closed with a butterfly wound closure, or if it's something that doesn't really need stitches. Something that is a little bit multi-purpose that I found, as a woman, we usually have sanitary products with us for when we are menstruating, and a sanitary napkin, a pad, can actually be used to cover a large wound. So if you have a very large gash somewhere that is pretty shallow and it's not bleeding out a lot, you can put a pad on it and like duct tape it down as a temporary dressing for that wound. And something that I read that I thought was a little bit funny, but it is applicable, you could use a tampon to stop a nosebleed. You know, you can put it right up in there. It kind of falls under the same idea that you're putting direct pressure on something, it's helping it clot, and it can help you get rid of that nosebleed. All of this information that I am talking about came from this book. It's called How to Fight a Bear and Win, 72 Other Real Survival Tips We Hope You'll Never Need. And it is meant to be kind of fictitious, and it is a little bit of a humor-based book, it is something that somebody in my family had bought, and I was kind of just flipping through it, considering taking this class, and I realized there were actually some really valuable things in here. And the more that I researched it, the more that I realized that some of these things were really applicable and could be used in a survival situation. Something else that I did read about: you can use roll-on deodorant to reduce itching and swelling from mosquito bites because of the aluminum in it. It helps to take care of that. And for minor burns, if you get a small sunburn, or if you got too close to a fire and have a minor burn, you can actually put honey on the burn and wrap it up, because the honey keeps the environment moist and it prevents infection. Honey also promotes regrowth because of the nutrients and all of the things that are in the honey. So I thought that was really interesting. But all of these are things that I think would be really helpful if you aren't looking to bring a lot of things with you, if you don't have room for like a massive first aid kit, or if you are kind of just in a situation where you need to use whatever you can find. I think something that's also really important to know how to do is CPR. And CPR has a specific beats per minute. There are a lot of songs that you can use to be able to do CPR. One of them is Stayin' Alive by, I actually can't remember who it's by, but the beat to that song, if you're able to sing it in your head, it can be the pattern for CPR. And when you're doing CPR, your hand movements are, you have one flat and you have one palm, and you're pushing down right in the center of the sternum right here to kind of jumpstart that heart. So I took a CPR class years ago and I got CPR certified, so I think that's a really helpful skill to have. And considering what we read in Deep Survival was kind of what made me think about the medical part of it, because we read about the girl that was in the plane crash and she ignored a broken arm, and there were so many people that had these injuries and that had, you know, parts of their body that had gotten hurt or cut or broken. And I just was reminded that, you know, it's always important to have the basic knowledge of what to do. You know, if you were in a situation, if you were hiking and you fell, there would be a way, you know, to help yourself. In addition to the book that I had found some things on, I also was able to look at some survival blogs to see kind of what people thought would be the best medical survival tips, and a lot of them came down to staying hydrated, always having small but nourishing foods with you, like protein bars and power bars and things like that to keep from getting hungry, knowing how to stop bleeding, being able to treat minor burns, mosquito bites, cuts, everything like that. And just being prepared, having things that you can use multi-purpose. I think it's always important to have some kind of multi-tool with you. That can be a knife or scissors or anything that you can use to cut something, because you never know when you're going to need to do something in an emergency. I think it's always important to have some extra cloth with you, or some kind of extra shirt that you could rip up in an emergency. Really just anything that you could use for a tourniquet. I think it's better to be prepared than to not have something. And I was able to learn how to put on the belt tourniquet and tourniquets in general from a couple of YouTube videos that I will list in my references.